Reimposed sanctions on Iran are now in effect. The U.S. putting those sanctions back in place against Iran after exiting the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. The decision came as the deal failed to address Iran's funding of militias in the Middle East and its continued efforts to build ballistic missiles. Iran says it will find a way to get around those sanctions. And for more on this story, I want to go to Iranian journalist Camelia Entekhabifard, who is in Dubai. And Camelia, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Let's talk about how these sanctions will affect real people on the ground, because we have heard two different stories. One coming from government officials that it will be possible to get around the sanctions, and another coming from people who are on the street saying that the effects are being felt and will be felt as the sanctions take full force.
The effect already has been felt in the society in the past couple of months since President Trump says he was to impose the oil sanctions and banking and shipment industries. The price of the local currency has been jumped so high, which we never had in the history, and also the price of the goods in the market has been increased. We have two different visions in Iran. The vision of the government, as you pointed out, and the people, which I'm assuming, despite of their different political views about if they were thinking for the regime changes or for the reform, or if they are supporting the conservatives, all of them in one way they were thinking the sanctions are fearful, and also they would hurt their future, and they are so much worried, that I can say. And in Iran too, the people in the government still they are living in the 40 years ago of the revolution time. But we are talking about the real people, Iranians, who are living at 21st century, and they were seeing Iran needed to have relation with the neighbors, with international communities. And these sanctions, it maybe bring some changes in the mind of the regime. As what I read, the United States is not asking anything about human rights violations or the regime changes. Simply, Mr. Pompeo tweeted last night he wants Iran to stop threatening the neighbors and not testing missiles and change its behavior in the region. This is not much, but the sanctions is too much, and it has been having effect on the core of Iran's economy. And this swap exchange of the oil for food and for the medicine is not in the favor of the regime. They would sooner than President Trump, they would deciding to make changes. However, President Trump have to review this exemption for certain countries. But I'm assuming in a month or 2 months, the regime would be coming up with another plan to perhaps have some sort of negotiations behalf of the people with some maybe partners in the Europe or etc. But they cannot continue to let people suffer like this.
Camelia, what you're saying is that you believe that a month from now there may actually be some changes to Iranian policy as a result of these sanctions?
As a result of the sanction, and also as a result of PM Netanyahu's visit in Oman, it was significant at any point of view you want to describe that. And in my opinion, if this message carried from the Omani, from Sultan Qaboos to Prime Minister Netanyahu, if Iranians change their behaviors in Syria, and also if conduct some negotiations with Saudi Arabia, not directly, we heard the Houthis are willing to meet Saudi counterparts soon this month, that can be some opening chapters of the favor of President Trump, in my opinion, because if Iran can make a little changes in the region, then President Trump makes some exemption he's given to some countries, or maybe he open up for another negotiations with Iran, not over Iran nuclear deal, over the regional issues.
Let's talk about the possibility of some anti-American protests, because we do see in the media occasionally these demonstrations really targeting the U.S., but at the same time, Iranians, in terms of numbers, are actually more pro-American on the street than practically any other nationality. You're Iranian. You have insight into this. Explain.
The simplest explanation I can give you is about myself. When we were going to school, most of us has been forced in the anniversary of the U.S. Embassy occupation to join the march and the rally at the streets. So that can be expanded to all the government sectors, most of the teachers and everyone, universities and the schools, to go to that to such an event. And we couldn't say everyone have been appearing in such an event or supporting the cause. And there's the fears. Still, the government, the regime is controlled by militia, the revolutionary guards. People are having fears to be arrested, to be tortured, to be sentenced to prison. And Iranians are genuinely a very peaceful people, and they try to avoid any violence with the system even. And yesterday you said about the rally and about the march against the United States, but at the same time we had pictures. People avoid crossing the U.S. and Israeli flags has been painted at the street front of the school gates. It's not a contradiction. It's elaborate these ideas that people were thinking differently than the regime. If the regime is thinking President Trump may be impeached, or at the next election he cannot be voted, and by then they can launch another talk with the U.S. in opposite way, we should say in Iran too, people are waiting for the next election in Iran to see who wants to run, and they want to show their own disappointment to the system and the regime. And by now we don't have any popular figure to wants to run for 2020 in Iran either. This sanctions, which has been having an enormous pain on the Iranians, you never heard they were blaming President Trump for that. Angry Iranians blaming their own regime for supporting militia and other regional countries for the sake of their own ideology rather than supporting Iranians. This message is clear. If the regime didn't want to hear, it's because it would cause their own existence. Otherwise, I'm sure the changes would come to Iran with or without sanctions.
All right, it's a very complex issue, and rarely do we have someone like you who can really shed light on it in the way that you did. Dubai-based journalist Camelia Entekhabifard.